Good evening.
Hello, 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 and welcome on our 17th meetup. Today we have Colleen Johnson and Daniel Vacanti. They're from Pro Kanban, and they also the supporters of Ukraine. Two amazing speakers, amazing topic, and we're gonna do everything we can to support Ukraine. So before we give the mic to Daniel and Colleen, we're gonna tell a bit about our initiative, and then we're gonna give the mic. So Arta, yep.
Yeah, hello. We are happy to see you here. We know that it's hard to compete with the good weather. Spring is coming to our lands and it's evening, so everyone is choosing wherever is go for maybe some support action for Ukraine on air or go with us to Zoom link. But let's do it once again. So I'm Artem. I'm from Ukraine. I'm agile coach and certified less coach by less company. And together with Andrei, we were thinking when the work has been started, like, how can we contribute? How can we help? And we decide that we will continue to do what we do the best, which means organize some learning events, workshops, webinars, trainings, and connect people who have what to share with people who want uh, to improve their skills to learn continuously. And we found Agile with Ukraine, and now we are launching a marathon of many meetups with top experts around the globe. And these meetups also recorded, so you maybe probably will look at this on YouTube. And also we are doing this to spread the word about what's going on here, because media sometimes switch in context, and I do believe that now we are not so popular on first lines of newspaper as it was 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, but the war is still here. Unfortunately, I'm currently in Ukraine, nearby Cherkasy. It's in the middle of the country. Some of our guests are also located in Ukraine right now. So yeah, Russia is still killing civilians, and the world is still going. If you have watched this, don't look up, so we now can see it around us. And someone thinks that they were not touching civilians, but this is the only second day of the war, and it's a civilian residential building in the Kiev city, the capital of Ukraine. And you can see that rocket or missile hit the residential building just 5-7 kilometers from city center. Uh, even they don't declare a war to Ukraine, they just do it as a special operation, they said. And you can see the central square of Kharkiv city with population more than 1 million people, and it's the biggest square in Europe. And now half of the city looks like this, even more than half, maybe 70%. And Chernigiv city is one of the eldest city in region, so it was situated before Moscow and Russia exist, and it's ruined more than 70%. And this is Sumy. And thanks God, recently last week they moved out from this region, Chernigiv and Sumy. But what we found there is absolutely disappointing and killing the whole motivation to continue looking these pictures. Here you can see the world's largest transport aircraft, Mria. So it's absolutely ruined at the second day of the war. They've bombed all the how to say aerodrome.
So they
Play
bombed the airport where it was located.
all the airports in
Yeah.
Ukraine at the first night, and that was the moment how we woke up with my family and two children, and we were in urgent need to leave the city. Um, this is Kiev, also one of the biggest shopping mall in Europe, before and after, and the flat of my grandmother is located just nearby, 500 meters from there. And again, thanks God that 2 days before we pushed her to leave the flat finally and change the location for more safe place. So now she's in safe place in Germany. This is a newest business center in Kiev, also before and after Russian invasion. This is residential building in Chernigiv, as you can see, also almost ruined. Not там. He's looking for his sister. And this is Mariupol, also very ruined and almost not existing city anymore. And they're continuing to bomb to send bombs and missiles on this city. This guy is Igor Bilanov. For those who know what is football, I mean real football, called soccer in some countries. He was a winner of Golden Ball in 1986, and now he's a soldier and he's protecting his country. And this is a prize for best European player of the year, for those who don't know. So he was one of the best players in the world, and now he need to take a rifle and protect his house, his home. This is Bucha, so nice small city nearby Kiev, just 5-7 kilometers before and after, and it's maybe the most soft picture of Bucha that you can find by this hashtag, because there are more than 400 civilians were found dead already after their troops leave the city, after Russian goes away. This is the next city, Borodyanka, also nearby Kiev. And what is interesting about Bucha, when we were looking for a house, we were choosing between Bucha and Bereshigivka when we bought. So yeah, it was very nice district nearby the city. And now it's almost ruined. The same for Borodyanka. So that's how Ukraine looks right now. And this is one of the latest bloody picture. It's Kramatorsk. The evacuation corridor was agreed with Russia before, and 4,000 civilian people were waiting, mostly families with children, were waiting for train which should evacuate them from Kramatorsk. And they sent another missiles, more than 50 dead people and more than 200 people in hospitals with different heart injuries. And that was a place for children nearby Kiev, Dobro Park, open air, big park. And this is my daughter. She's looking on the residential of Santa Claus. It's the end of the January this year, so just a few months ago. As you can see, quite a modern place, very positive, and that what they did to this place. Not looks like a military object, not looks like a army of nationalists that should be cleaned up from the ground. No, it's a bit different purpose and different goals of the army and what they are doing here. And this is Zakhar. He is originally from Bucha. He's 11 years old, and now he's sitting somewhere hiding in western part of country of Ukraine. And that's what he's drawing, because he was observer how the Mria aircraft was bombed and at the first days. And he drawn Ukrainian soldiers who are pushing out Russian army from our territory. More of such pictures you can find by tag UA Kids Today in Facebook and Instagram. It's another initiative which we've launched with my wife. It's about kids in Ukraine who are drawing during the war to show their emotions and offload it on paper. Um, yeah, this picture was on Reuters and CBS News first line after our interview about the project to them. But we are not sitting in shelters, not crying every day, not waiting for some miracle or genie from the bottle who will save us from the biggest evil on the planet and universe. We are such a people who used to do something and not wait for others. And this is the people who are going back to their city Irpin and helping local administration and soldiers to clean up the streets, also from some consequences of this behavior of our neighbors, so to say. And this is Ukrainian software developers sitting in shelter and continuously deliver increments to production. So even I've heard feedback from the customers that they deliver more than before work have been started, and they are very surprised because everyone was expected that like they cannot rely on these developers anymore. But our people are very courage, very committed, and want to continue their normal way of living, and we will do it definitely after our win in this war. And also we want to remind you that war is not so far. Ukraine is not in another planet or in another universe. We are almost in the city, in the center of the Europe, and we are fighting not only for our dignity or allowance to use our language. We are fighting for freedom and democracy in the whole world, and we hope that this war will be isolated and finished soon here and will not affect other countries, because it's not so positive and promising as our children wanted. So please stand with Ukraine, support Ukraine, help us in this. And what we are doing, we are collaborating with Uniters Foundation, and Andrei will tell you more about Uniters Foundation. Thank you, and sorry for some sound.
Thanks, Artem. So Artem is actually with two kids in the rental department. So kids also have to have fun after everything they've been through. But we're supporting. We are actually cooperating with the United Foundation. This is the foundation that was created in 2014, right after Maidan, and right after the first Russian aggression toward Ukraine, when the Crimea was annexed and when the war in Donbass started. So it started as a pretty small foundation, just with just with people from Ukraine who are living in Poland to support Ukraine, and they've been supporting Ukraine for 8 long years. And for that 8 long years, they became better and better in supporting Ukraine. Right now, it's not a small foundation anymore. It's a foundation who has contacts all across the world and is also cooperating directly with the biggest Ukrainian funds like Come Back Alive and the foundation of Serhiy Prytula. And this foundation also cooperates directly with the armed forces of Ukraine. 90% of help which goes to Ukraine comes through Poland. And in Warsaw, there is the biggest logistics center over here. So the full-scale war has started on the 24th of February, and the first cargo, the first help that went from Poland to Ukraine from this foundation went on the 26th of February, so less than 2 days after the war started. And since then, they delivered more than 3,050 tons of help. Just think of that number. It's approximately 100 tons of help per day. It's enormous. It's huge. I've been there numerous times, and this is the best continuous integration, continuous deployment I've ever seen. So this is the fastest way how the help can get to Ukraine. Yeah, so since the beginning of our initiative, we raised more than $34,000. Yeah, today Colleen and Daniel said that all of the donations that is going to be made today is going to be matched by Pro Kanban, and we thank you guys for that, and we just ask you to donate. Artem will also post the links how you can donate, but the easiest ways, it's the Polish website, zrutka.pl, and PayPal, which can be found also on our website. So now we're going to switch to some awesome content. Don't forget to donate, and remember that the war is still going on in Ukraine. Thanks a lot. Colleen, Daniel, we give you the mic, and we're sorry for taking so long.
No, I can't imagine that you guys get to have to walk through this presentation every day to kick these off. So thank you guys for what you're doing, because you're right, this isn't something that's in the news every day anymore. So this is important, and it's important, and we're honored to be a part of getting this message out. We're just going to talk a little bit about the community that we're trying to build with Pro Kanban, and then really open this up for conversation. Artem, is that the right screen?
Swap on. It's presenter mode. Swap on, please.
Presenter mode.
Better?
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Like Andre and Artem said, we are doing this to try to help raise money for Agile with Ukraine, and we will match, Pro Kanban will match all of the donations made today as part of this effort. So if you're enjoying this conversation and you want to help with the efforts that Agile with Ukraine is making, please make even a small donation, and Pro Kanban will be there to match it dollar for dollar. So we'll kick things off here. And if you were part of the conversation before we hit record, we spent some time talking about Dan and his books. I'll let Dan introduce himself first.
Other than my bullet points that are listed there, no, I mean, yeah, no, I just want to say as well, happy to be here. It does seem a bit strange talking about Pro Kanban after what we've just seen, but you know, hopefully we can do what we can do some good for the for Ukrainian people and everybody who's suffering there. Not much to say about me, like I said, other than what these bullet points are saying here. I essentially just do whatever Colleen says. I mean, that's pretty much my job description, and has been for the past 2 years. So and happy to be a part of that. So thanks.
Well, let's talk about what we're trying to do with Pro Kanban. I mean, I think, you know, not unlike what we're trying to do in talking about Agile with Ukraine, our goal here is focusing on people and community. If you've been part of any of different Agile communities, whether it's Kanban or Scrum, one of the things that we try to really anchor everything we do in Pro Kanban in is belonging and inclusion. And so our goal is, if you have any interest in Kanban, whether it's just understanding a little bit more about metrics or forecasting, or figuring out how you can blend some of your Kanban practices for your Scrum team, then you belong here. It doesn't require that you have all the certifications, that you've been in the community for 20 years. It's really just, if you are interested, we want there to be a space for you here. When we think about Pro Kanban, we want to also recognize that there's no single methodology or framework that has all the right answers. And so, you know, I think for a long time in the Agile community, there has been a big kind of divide between whether it's Scrum or Kanban, or is Kanban only for service teams. And what we also want to recognize is that there's a lot of great practices in everything we do that we can bring together to really be effective, depending on what the team's needs are at that time. Dan, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, for a long time in the Kanban community, there has been a will for ignorance, I would say, or even worse, for not only other methodologies and frameworks, but other people with dissenting opinion. So, you know, our philosophy behind ProKanban.org is to kind of try and break down those walls. And it's okay to have people who have different ideas. It's okay to have people who, you know, believe differently or act differently or look differently, you know, as part of your community. So that was really our main motivation, you know, as we go forward.
Like a lot of organizations in our space, we're trying to start with education. So you'll see on our website that we offer 2 courses right now. One is applying professional Kanban, and the second is applying metrics for predictability. We do have a path to become a Pro Kanban trainer. And I think probably one of the things that differentiates Pro Kanban from other Kanban organizations the most is our assessments. And so it was really important to us in going down this education path that there was a way to certify your learning. So what we offer are standalone certification assessments. You can self-study if that's your preferred path through the Kanban guide, which has, Dan, are we up to 20 translations now? I think we're getting close, right?
Yeah, I lost count after 2. So yeah, we're pretty high up there.
Yeah, so you can study through the Kanban guide and other free resources on the Pro Kanban website and take those certification assessments at any time. There's also open assessments, which are free kind of practice exams. So if you want to get in there and test out your knowledge before taking the certification assessments, that is available as well. And then probably the biggest offering that we have for the community is in our Slack group. Our Slack is open to everyone. So what we have there are multiple different channels where you can ask questions, you can look for a mentor, and we want that to be a safe space where we can all learn together. Like Dan said, our goal with this organization is that we're really focusing on welcoming different backgrounds, different points of view, different levels of learning so that we can all grow together. So this is a question we get frequently. Why do we need another certification? And I think it's a fair question. There's a lot of different options out there available in terms of your path of learning, whether it's Kanban or Scrum. But like we said, the one really big differentiator in what we're trying to do is make sure that there's a way that you can validate your learning in a way where we're all speaking using the same terminology, talking about metrics the same way, and making sure that we have that shared language and understanding of what we mean by Kanban. The certification can help you, of course, in the job market. It can also help you on your learning journey. We'll be adding more courses to our catalog this year and hope to do some more advanced Kanban classes that will be coming soon. But our overall goal here is to really just help people learn and help people learn in a way that's very practical and applicable so that if you take this class or take the assessment, you can put something into practice for your team right away. Anything you want to add, Dan?
Yeah, the truth of the matter, as Colleen said, when people ask us why do we need another certification, the truth of the matter is you don't. I mean, you honestly don't. Which is why we have. I was going to say borrowed, but maybe stolen is the better word. From Scrum.org's example, where it's not about you just show up and you pay some money and automatically you're certified. At least there's we hope, as Colleen just mentioned, a little bit of rigor around getting that certification. You don't necessarily have to take a class. You don't necessarily have to know somebody. You're able to just on your own, as Colleen said, validate your learning. And if that's useful to you, that's something that we wanted to put out there for people who at least want to have some, again, for lack of a better word, some assessment of their progress along their learning journey, along their Kanban learning journey.
All right, but why now? Well, I mean, like Daniel said at the beginning, it's kind of hard to talk about building a community after the presentation that we started with, right? But I think it's very important that we talk about how important that sense of community is to creating a safe space for learning. And so one of the things that we really wanted to focus on from the very beginning was making a safe community, free from sexual harassment, free from bullying, and really a place where we can contribute without fear that anything is going to be stolen or trivialized. And one of the most amazing things I've seen in this community already is kind of similar to what Dan was talking about, and maybe trying to crowdsource materials. We've had people coming from all over the world to contribute to the Kanban guide. We were even talking yesterday, we have a member of the community who's been working on a visual version of the guide. But everything has been very community focused in terms of everybody jumping in and contributing where they can. And I think that's a pretty amazing thing in this day and age when it can feel a little bit like everybody's trying to make a buck off their idea. So we're really excited that this community feels different and that we're trying to make a space where everybody can find their way of contributing with something that's meaningful to them. Anything from your side, Dan?
No, yeah, I mean, just the emphasis on safety. So yeah.
Yeah. In the line with safety, our code of conduct is don't be a jerk, be excellent to each other, from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. But it really is something that we expect everybody in the community to uphold. Our goal, or at least my personal goal, is not to have to police people, especially in Slack, which can be a growing challenge as the Slack community grows. And I think one of the things we really want is for everybody to be able to call out the behavior that's not acceptable in that group, right? And so we've seen this, unfortunately, in a big community, we've already seen instances where we've had to have people speak up and say that that's not acceptable behavior or not acceptable ways to communicate with each other. And I'm proud of the fact that that has all worked out in a productive way where we've been able to address any issues. But really, this is at the core of everything that we do. Let's respect each other, respect each other's backgrounds and perspectives. I saw somebody post a message here about how can I get involved? So join us on Slack. That's the best place to start. Our Slack, the link to join Slack can be found under the resources tab at prokanban.org. Take a look at the Kanban guide. If you go to the Kanban guide site, or you can also get there through the resources tab, and you do not see your language in the Kanban guide, let us know. Reach out to Daniel. He can help put you in touch with next steps for translating the guide. And if there's other learning resources that you think you would be excited to contribute to Pro Kanban, let us know. I mean, we're always looking for different ways and different avenues to help people learn. I think we tend to all fall back into the same methods, right? It's kind of, like Dan said, it's easy to borrow or steal what we've seen work before, but I think what we're trying to do is a little different here. And we're trying to say, if there's a method for you that works differently, then let's explore how we can help people learn that way. Check out our class listings. If you're interested in becoming a Pro Kanban trainer as well, you can reach out to myself or to Daniel and let us know if that's a path that you'd like to explore. We have Ask a Kanban Trainer meetup. You can find that on meetup.com. We have a session next week with Jennifer Bullock and Jose Casal. Those are fun because you just get, it's just an open session to ask a Kanban trainer different questions. We are also happy to do flow metrics reviews with teams. If you want to do a Kanban meetup where we talk through flow metrics and even look at team metrics, I think those are always fun to do. I was actually doing one right before this call where I met with a team and ran through their metrics and talked about what are some easy things to start or to try differently based on what we're seeing in the metrics. So if you're interested in doing any kind of flow metrics review, let us know. And bring someone new, bring somebody new to the conversation, to a meetup, and help us amplify new voices in the community. So we have a Women in Agile scholarship program for Pro Kanban as well, to help women in Agile become Pro Kanban trainers. That's been a really exciting program in terms of trying to reach different parts of the world and find new voices in the community who are interested in that path to become trainers. Ultimately, our number one thing here is respect for each other. We were all new at this once. It's easy to forget that, especially if you've been in the industry a very long time. I loved this picture because it was from a 10-year-old's board of different ways to pay it forward in a classroom, but we were all new at this at one time. So let's remember that when we see new questions or when we see new people stepping up and coming to the table with new ideas or new ways, new questions, challenging the way that we've always done things, right? That's an opportunity for us all to learn. Anything you want to add there, Dan? Nope. Like I said, check out the course list on the site. You can find classes for applying professional Kanban or applying metrics for predictability. And you can also find the Ask a Kanban Trainer on meetup.com. And I will go ahead and pause there and we can open this up for conversation or questions. Let me stop sharing here. And feel free to just come right off of mute if you would like to ask a question.
Maybe before anybody asks a question, you actually had a quote, Colleen, about building a community, why this is important. I'm just going to say on the example of Ukraine, that all of the success we had is not only due to the way we fight, but it's also about the way we united over there. And you know, this time they show not only the most inhumane acts that we could witness, but they also show the most humane acts. And without actually having a sense of community and having a sense of a common goal, it would be pretty impossible to do. So I don't think there is a bad time to build a community. Actually, even in the worst times, the strongest communities are being built. That's just my opinion over here.
Yeah, humans are social animals, you know, and while one person can do great things, many people can do, even greater things. I think, Andre, as you were just saying. So it's again, it's awkward comparing what we're trying to do with Pro Kanban with what's going on in Ukraine. But I think some of these lessons are immutable, and so I'm not sure what else to say about that.
Yeah, well, and I think, similarly, the world is a very small place, right? We have more in common than we have apart. And I think you can feel that through what you guys are doing through this effort for Agile with Ukraine. And we see that every day with the Pro Kanban community as well, right? There's far more that we all have together to grow from and learn from and work on together than there is big differences in what we're trying to do.
So, okay, guys, so now maybe it's a wonderful occasion to actually ask a lot of questions. And maybe while you are you're waiting on one, maybe I'll just ask one. Okay, so being a Scrum trainer, I'm pretty frequently asked about what are the most common anti-patterns that you see in Scrum. Yeah, so maybe I'll ask the same question about Kanban. What are the most common anti-patterns that you observe in Kanban?
Is there a minimum number? I feel like I could make a pretty big list here.
Go wild.
Go wild. Well,
what's your top 3?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Let me think for a second. I'm going to whittle this down.
And Daniel's as well were interested so that they wouldn't be, you know, identical from yours, Colleen.
Okay, I think I've got my 3. I'm going to start with moving blocked items into a separate column. I think that's a pretty common one of like, how do I get this out of my way? Something's blocked. I need it out of the way so I can keep working. And obviously, as soon as we do that, something's paused and we've increased the amount of work in progress. So that's a very common pattern. And I think the anti-pattern I see there is that people name it something different in order to not have a blocked column. It'll be like, we're waiting on others, or this is a parking lot, right? And so that's a very common way to kind of skirt having a blocked column. I think another one I see a lot is making the work items too small. And so, you know, we talk about how do we get things as small as possible so they flow through the system quickly. But if you make them so small that they're all dependent on each other to move, you create your own log jam of work items that now can't move through tests or can't be deployed independently. And so that's kind of I think an overcorrection that a lot of teams make in terms of trying to get work so small that, you know, it's too small at that point. It's almost task level or subtask level. And then I think the last thing, and I'm probably going to steal this one from Dan, we'll see, is not focusing on work item age. And so, you know, I think for a lot of new teams, we spend a lot of time looking at WIP limits and trying to manage WIP limits within the team, but we don't spend enough time talking about how old the work items are on the board. And it's very easy then you can have certain things that are constantly moving and other things that are aging out on the board. And the bigger the WIP for that team, the easier it is to have things that just age out endlessly. Like I mentioned, I did a kind of a board tear down right before this call, and we looked at the work item age chart for that team, and they were like, wait a minute, what is this one? It's been in progress for 68 days. And the whole team was like, what is this? And I was like, well, it's on your board right now. This ticket's on your board right now. And so I think not paying attention to work item age is one of the things that can be a big game changer for a team in terms of improving their flow. That's my top 3. How about you, Dan?
Yeah, of course, Colleen stole all the good ones. To all of those, I would add thinking that Kanban is just about visualization. You know, so many times we go into organizations, they're like, oh, well, pre-pandemic anyway, they're like, oh, look, I've got Post-it notes up on a whiteboard, I'm doing Kanban. Or look, now post-pandemic, it's like, oh, look, I've got this Jira board set up. Oh, we're doing Kanban. But there's no notion of limiting work, as Colleen said, limiting work in progress. There's no tracking of the metrics for improvement. You know, there's no notion of some of these other things, service level expectations and stuff like that. But we have our work visualized, and so we're doing Kanban. Not true. Huge anti-pattern. Probably the thing that frustrates me the most. Number 2 would be thinking that Kanban is, I think Colleen, you already said this before too, thinking that Kanban is just for maintenance or sustainment work, or for maybe even operations work. And I would maybe even lump in with that, thinking that Kanban can't be used with other frameworks, you know, like Scrum. To me, that's a huge anti-pattern. Oh, we're doing Kanban, we can't do Scrum. Oh, we're doing Kanban, we can only use it for maintenance work and not for complex product development work. All huge anti-patterns, in the sense that you're really losing kind of, I would argue, the biggest benefits of doing Kanban by pigeonholing yourself into that thinking. And then number 3, I'm going to say it again because it's so important, because it is the most important thing. And people think that I'm joking when I say this, but it is true. Not paying attention to aging. You know, if you want to understand flow, you have to understand aging, period. You have to. I mean, you just do. And so anybody who's doing Kanban, but they don't know the age of the items that are on their board, you know, in my mind, just really aren't doing Kanban. So I gave you 2 and just another one, because I had to upvote the aging one, because I think it's so important.
I can even add one more. So one of the things that I do observe constantly is that you know, people who start doing Kanban, they say, yeah, we're limiting work in progress. But when does the work in progress start? Because usually for people who claim that we're limiting work in progress, the work in progress starts for them with coding. But we don't pay attention at all what happens before that. And this is one of the stuff I also pay attention to Scrum masters who start using Scrum that, guys, you can, if you look only at stuff what happens in sprint and you don't see all of the bunch of stuff that happens before the sprint starts and the other stuff that is after the sprint, so you're sub-optimizing a small part of the end-to-end process. And to understand the end-to-end process, you have to pay attention to the whole, right? And the work in progress starts even way before you start actually coding or developing stuff, right? That's one of the most popular anti-patterns that I do see.
Well, even looking at that time, if you're looking at work item age, we tend to have like a requested or a next on deck or a to-do column, but looking at work item age of that column can be a big indicator if you're over planning, right?
Yeah.
So you got a lot. There's so much work in that to-do column that maybe it's, like you said, that's where work is aging because you've over planned and everything's jumping ahead of that in terms of priority.
Okay, what I also observe, for example, constantly is that teams tend to add like a streamlined lane, like for hot fixes in Kanban. It's also awesome. So we have a flow, and then we have a separate flow for some.
Especially if this lane without limits,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's an anti-pattern and a myth and I don't know whatever adjective you want to use there. It's all of that all rolled into one. But a lot of people think that you have to have that. You have to, if you're doing Kanban, you have to have that expedite lane, which is so not true. I would argue in Kanban you have to not have it. If anything, I think our Kanban would argue to not have it. The second you throw an expedite lane in there, you've killed your flow, which is the antithesis of Kanban.
Once I've seen even 3 expedite line. So one was for customer success team. They requested their own line because they said we are speaking with clients every day. It's so important. We're a customer-centric business, so we need this. Another one was for CTO, I believe, yeah, because he said that you almost pushed me out from the priority setting, and I need to build a stable system. And third one was for defects and stuff like that. So it's a totally crazy system they try to call Kanban.
Yeah, it's the important stuff, the really important stuff, and the really important stuff, right? I worked with a team once. Their work in progress limits, if you're add up their work in progress limits for the whole board, it was 9. But they introduced an expedite lane, and at any given time you'd walk up to that Kanban board, and in that expedite lane there'd be 32 items. Draw what conclusions you will from that.
It's like I've spoken with one client who are trying to implement OKRs to improve their focus on main goals. And they said, but we're ignoring one rule about these 3 to 5 objectives because it's not enough for a big and very hungry business. So we have about 25 objectives on the company level. And then they like cascaded down, and it could be up to 80 objectives for department. And
I mean, all of you probably see this in Scrum as well. Everybody doesn't want to follow the rules because they're like, oh, we're different. Oh, we're different. I love to say, yeah, you're different, just like everybody else. I mean, there's a reason these things exist, and if you think you are above or outside them, what's more likely? That these rules are wrong, or that you're different. What's honestly more likely?
Regarding different, give me for a second. Regarding we are different, I'm quite often answering them like, yeah, you're totally different. Show me this by following the rule, because almost everyone is ignoring. So show me that you are different. Try to follow the basic principles, and then you can evaluate the outcome, and it will be much closer to what you want to achieve. Just give it a chance.
And even that notion of rules, I think, is a pretty big myth in Kanban. I hear a lot from especially like engineering leadership or management that we don't want to do Kanban because you can just work on things infinitely, right? Or there's nothing to push against, or the teams don't have deadlines. And I think that's also a common misconception that Kanban is very loose. I can pull these tickets in and work forever. And that's where, we both said work item age, but I think also the structure that a team creates by building in workflow policies is critically important too, and having the team come up with them and agree to them before you start working. Because as soon as someone tells me, oh, I don't like Kanban because it doesn't have enough structure, people can work on things forever, I'm like, oh, well, do you have workflow policies? Can you see your work item 8? Right? There's all these things that are probably missing from that. And I think that's where that myth of it being less structured or too loose can come in.
Yep. And also when organizations say that we're different, so it's true, they are different, but the reason why they struggle into actually following the rules or even establishing them is that while they implement something like Kanban or they try or Scrum, they expect that the method or the framework itself is going to solve their problems. And it does not work that way. The method or the framework highlights your problems and then asks a nasty question. What the hell are you going to do with that? And it's you who have to do something, right? And this is the hard part when actually implementing something, that after you implement something, you have to fix it. And it hurts. Because especially in large organizations, if you have to fix something, means most probably that somebody screwed it up earlier. And we cannot let that happen to say that somebody screwed it up, right?
Okay. I've got a few questions, but I don't know where to start. Daniel, you just said Kanban is for complex work. I'm not trying to be egotist. I'm not trying to be problematic on purpose, but when we were speaking to Nigel Thurlow the other day, and I even heard David Snowden say this, he says Kanban is for complicated, definitely not complex work. So what's your argument for me to back that back into the...
My argument is if you go read any flow theory, I'm talking about Little's law, I'm talking about any type of Q theory, there is never the assumption there that says, big warning sign that says don't use this for complex work. In fact, quite the opposite. If you go and read Little, if you go and read Deming, if you go and read Stewart, anywhere, anytime you have workflow, which is pretty much everywhere, but anytime you have workflow, the principles of flow, exist. Same thing with Don Reinertson's book. Go read Don Reinertson's book, and there's no disclaimer on Don Reinertson's work that says, please don't use this in complex environments, because it's not true. I personally think too much energy is wasted on trying to categorize things like, oh, well, we're in the complex domain, so you have to do this, or whereas, you're in the, whatever. They keep changing names. Simple, obvious. What is it? I don't know. I don't know what it is anymore. So you have to use this. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying I don't find those conversations useful. Like I said, anytime you have workflow, then I personally would bring the principles of flow to bear to help solve that problem.
So how would you handle experiments, the research part?
I would argue, and again, I love Colleen's opinion on this. An experiment is probably a first order work item type on your board that you flow through and you learn from. The idea that when we kind of talk about this in the guide, but probably not in as much detail. I shouldn't say probably. We don't talk about it in as much detail as we should be, because it's a guide. We get into much more detail in the class, but we have these work items that are supposed to represent units of value, but kind of the way that we define value in Kanban is more from the feedback perspective, rather from a necessarily, say, financial perspective. And anytime you complete something and you can get some type of feedback, whether yes, this was helpful, or no, this wasn't. To me, that's a work item type, and experiments fall into that category for me. I don't know, Colleen, what do you think?
Yeah, when I think of the experiment, well, I think there's kind of a couple different ways to think about experiments. You can experiment with the system, and it can be the experiments of what you're delivering in the system. And so when I think about a lot of these things from a Kanban perspective, like all of these things are ways for your team to get better at how they're delivering, right? So there's always an opportunity to improve. And when I think about the system itself, it's like, how do we make small tweaks to this over time to keep getting better at how we're delivering value? And so that can be things like looking at, changing your policies, changing your WIP limits, changing how you're moving work across your board, right? And what conversations you're having. But I think when we also look at it as a bigger feedback loop and thinking about that, you know, learning that can come from what you're delivering, it's like, how do you get things as small as possible so that they're still delivering value in that learning, and helping you decide what to work on next. I do a lot of coaching right now at kind of portfolio level Kanban. I'm thinking about like, how do we move ethics through a Kanban flow? And a lot of times that's the same conversation you're having at that level, right? That's a very complex problem in terms of juggling what features need to be delivered and what customers are expecting. But if we're piecing, you know, if you're chunking up your epics in a way where it's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, you haven't really solved the problem of getting feedback on what to work on next. And so if we think about experimentation from that level, it's like, how do we get a small thing out that we can learn from that's going to help us pick what epic to pull in next? And so there's kind of, I think there's multiple layers of how to use your Kanban system to help you learn what refinements to make it to the workflow itself and to what you're going to work on next.
Bastian, do you want to ask more about this topic, or I have separate
Oh, I've
questions?
got loads of questions, but you go ahead, Arsen.
Yeah, you ask please first, and I will just
So,
stay queue.
well, just lead on to what you just saying there, Colleen. Then, future programs for Pro Kanban. So the Kanban method has different layers, and they will touch on the portfolio layer. Is that what you guys are looking to do next? Because you're doing, like, let's say the team level. Are you going to?
Open to suggestions here on what people want to learn. I think there's a couple different ways to consider what we do, and we're open, you know, this is a community driven event and program. So we want to hear from you what kind of learning you would like to see next. I mean, I think when you think about portfolio level Kanban, the principles behind it don't really change very much. So in some ways, it's not really any different than team level Kanban, but maybe some of the conversations and the ways that we approach working around implementing portfolio level Kanban might be different. So I don't know that the core, you know, it's interesting. We've also talked about the same thing with like Kanban for UX or Kanban for, you know, all these Kanban for security teams, but really at its core, the Kanban piece isn't really any different, right? Where you apply it in the organization. So I don't know where that will go next. Dan, what would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a, I was going to say mistake. Mistake is harsh. I don't know what the right word is, but it's I'll just use mistake. It's a bit of a mistake to think of the APK, our first class that we put out there, Applying Professional Kanban class. It's a bit of a mistake to think of that as a team only class. It's about the basic principles of flow. It's about understanding the basic principles of flow and how to apply them to your specific context. So I think Colleen is right. I mean, I don't think it really matters, you know, what level of organization you're talking about, whether you're talking about a single team, whether you're talking about teams of teams, whether we're talking about portfolio Kanban, strategy Kanban, whatever. I don't think it really matters if flow applies. But having said all that, certainly context does matter. So I think, I mean, you can see we're kind of dancing because we don't necessarily want to commit to anything. But probably in the future, the newer classes that we offer will be more context specific, I think, Justin, to address some of the concerns that you're talking about. You know, what are the nuances of applying Kanban at the portfolio level? What are the nuances of applying it, you know, at some of these other things? And, you know, we'll probably borrow heavily from things like, you know, flight levels and tame flow and all those, because those are people that we talk to almost literally every day. So sorry, I babbled. Sorry. Once I start talking about theory of constraints, that's when I know I've talked for too long, by the way, just so you know, just so everybody knows. Yeah.
Sorry, Dan, what was the first piece you mentioned before TAMFlow? You said flight levels?
Flight levels, yes. If anybody's familiar with flight levels, Klaus Leopold, Cliff Hazel.
Got
it. That's essentially what they talk about is, you know, what different levels. I'll let you do your own research, and then we can come back and talk about that. But if this group is interested in some of those things, I would highly recommend having Klaus and Cliff, you know, on the show to talk about some of that stuff.
Yeah, because John Coleman is a big fan of TameFlow too, and one of the reasons that it does a full kitchen stance at the beginning before you start work, which is kind of like, you know, in Scrum definition of ready or something like that, but a bit more deeper. and that would probably remove the blocked work from coming in into workflow.
Yeah, possibly. I do think it's important to understand all this stuff. I mean, I think I'm on the record, and again, nobody has to really listen to me, and nobody really probably should listen to me. But I personally am not a huge fan of theory of constraints. But that's not to say that you should not study it and you should not know about it, because I think all of these things can be helpful, you know, at some level, to be sure.
Okay, so you've said a lot about community at the beginning of this event, that Pro Kanban is about community and learn Kanban through community, and it's not about just visiting class and take your certificate after, put it in a nice place and say to everyone that now I'm a super expert. And it's very nice. I really like it, because I don't like this like certification in 2 days of sitting in a closed room and paying money. But can you tell us more about the first steps of creating a community, how it was? Like, what turned out the way you thought before starting this? Because it's always, this way is full of surprises, at least in my experience of creating own businesses. What was the hardest thing, you know, when you create a Pro Kanban org? And what are your key learnings along this way, if you can summarize some of them, maybe?
Colleen?
I think I think when we first set out to create this community, it was a lot of like, we know amazing people, let's start with them, right? Like, let's reach out to these people, get them in the community and build from there. And, you know, we had some warnings from other community building people that said, if you let this happen organically, it will not reflect the communities that you're trying to serve and be a part of, meaning it can potentially lack a lot of diversity, and that's a problem in the tech community in general. And so when we first started growing, we saw that same exact pattern, right? We did not have a lot of gender diversity, ethnic diversity, geographic diversity, because I think, you get a hub in one place and it grows from that group, and it looks like the same people that are inviting you in. So pretty quickly, we realized that we had to do something a priority. And so that's where our scholarship program was born from. And really trying to find new voices and people interested in joining the community. And then doing things like Ask a Trainer, trying to connect with meetup groups in different countries. So we've been working in Nigeria, we're trying to do some meetup work right now with a group in the Bahamas. So looking at where is Agile kind of emerging in different places where maybe Scrum is the only thing that in those communities that they've heard of. How do we bring Kanban, this is very new. So it's like, how do we bring Kanban up as part of the conversation in these emerging Agile markets? And so I think that's been one of the things that was the most surprising to me. I thought maybe we were past that point in the tech industry and this would just happen naturally. And it doesn't. It requires a lot of purpose and intent behind making the community look and feel different. And I think that was probably the biggest surprise early on.
Kind of along those lines, I would say I felt like we were a bit overwhelmed by the response when we first started to the point where we quite honestly and quite transparently could not keep up. So many good people had been chased away from the Kanban community that saw us as a good path back in. But keeping in mind the things that we wanted to do, as Colleen was saying, made it very, very difficult. Not only early on, but to this day, about how do we build a community with that intent? So I was stunned, I think, at the response, really. And so for those of you who have found it maybe hard to access this or whatever, please keep giving us a shot, because we're learning every day about how we do things better. So I'd love to see all of you here as part of our community.
Thank you. Alona, I believe that you have several.
Is it time for
questions.
stupid questions yet?
Every meetup.
I mean, I try to give way to the smart questions first before going with the stupid ones.
I've started your section. I've just started.
Okay, good. So my stupid question is the following. And Please forgive me, or dearest Kanban practitioners, etc., and smart people, but in my reality, I once met a team's request to switch to Kanban instead of Scrum because, and I quote here, Kanban has fewer meetings. By that, they mean none. So no ceremonies. Kanban has no ceremonies. My explanation was that, well, there are still ones, it's just that, well, they are sort of more optional. Was kind of a disappointing to them. Scrum
Well,
also has no, so, oh my God, Arthur, let's leave it for later. Yeah, the question is actually from your experience with, you know, what people usually want, what development usually wants is like no managers, no meetings, right? So how do you deal with those requests?
I think I've had this exact same thing said to me. So I did work with an organization that said the same thing about meetings. And you know what I see most frequently with teams that go into trying Kanban with that mindset is they drop all these things, right? And then what happens, what's always like the first symptom of that is they start pulling work in the board and they're like, it gets stuck immediately because they're like, we don't know what this is. We don't know how we're going to approach working on it because they stopped having a conversation about their work, right? There's a lot of highly collaborative things that are part of Scrum, for example, grooming, pointing, right, that are part of facilitating conversations with the team so they know what they're going to work on and how they're going to break their work up before they start working on it. There's still a need for those things. And what I usually start with is, how do you do this now, right? How do you know that this story is sized appropriately to move through the system or broken down in a way where it's valuable and as small as possible? Or how do we make sure that testing understands what their approach might be in delivering a piece, you know, a user story? All of those things still need to be there. And so that's usually where I like to start with them of how do you focus on the outcome, right? We talk about this all the time, focus on the outcome of what those things are, and then think about how you fold those into your flow. And so maybe it's like, we're gonna make sure that every story that moves into the to-do column has been reviewed by the team. And then the team can figure out where that takes place or something like that. But those things exist in Scrum for a reason. So what you don't want to do is just be like, well, we're going to switch to Kanban and now we never need to talk to each other again, right? Story pointing facilitates a conversation. And so maybe you don't need the points in a Kanban system, but if that helps your team talk through assumptions and how they're going to approach the work, then don't get rid of it. There's still so much value in that. And the same thing with retros, right? I mean, I think at the Lean Agile US conference a few years ago, I did a talk on retrospectives in Kanban. I think that's another common thing that people are like, oh, there's no retros. If that's helping your team improve and that's an opportunity for you to come together and review data and identify improvements, why would you get rid of that? So there's no rules to say that you can't do those things, but that is a very common assumption.
Honestly, and this is my sort of belief only, in my opinion only, but people who want to switch to Kanban because there is no meetings are exactly people who believe that Kanban is just the board. So
Yeah, people who get really, or teams that get really good at flow. If you were to bring a layperson in from the outside, you say, hey, look, here's this team that's really good at flow. And oh, by the way, on this other hand, look, there's this really team that's really good at, there's this other team that's really good at Scrum. A layperson from the outside probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Because if your focus is on flow, it's reasonable that every day you should be checking in to making sure that things are flowing the way that you expect them to. It's reasonable that from time to time we should be meeting as a team to talk about how we improve our process. It's reasonable that from time to time we should get together as a team and talk about, hey, what goal are we going to set and how are we going to achieve it? Those are things that you do whether you're talking about flow or not. And oh, by the way, that sounds a whole heck of a lot like Scrum.
Colleen, can I ask you another quick question, please?
Mm-hmm.
When we first started, you mentioned about your team had an item on the board for over 60 days. Again, I'm not trying to be problematic on purpose, but do they not have an SLE in place to, and if they didn't, what's your steps to get them to that place?
Yeah, this team did not have an SLE in place. So it was brand new. And this was kind of a first pass. They didn't even have WIP limits in place yet. So we just started by looking at some of the data. Their question right out the gate, and this is a very common thing for, I think everybody knew that Kanban is you hire a consultant and you're like, what should our WIP limits be? What's the right WIP limits for our team? And my answer was, let's look at the data. And so we spent some time digging into some of their data and looking at WIP run charts to say, like, how much variability has there been in your WIP over the last month? Let's look at your cumulative flow diagram and talk about the impact that WIP is having on your cycle time. And so we just started by looking at data. And then, you know, part of the conversation was their question was, you know, we do a daily, although they said we do a daily twice a week, but they said we do a daily stand-up twice a week. And what questions should we be asking as part of that? And that's when we started talking about work item age and looking at what's the best place to find that and highlight aging work for that team. So this was a very early conversation for this team. They did not have an SLE yet, but we were trying to figure out what's a good starting point for WIP limits for a new team. And I was trying to highlight to them by showing them that work item age that was only, putting the WIP limits in place was only going to be half of the equation for them. But yeah, hopefully, and if you check back in a couple months, I'll have an SLE for that team. And we'll see things flatten out and be a lot more consistent with their WIP.
Thank you.
Hey, Dan. Sorry, going back to your question or your feedback on theory of constraints, would you be able to elaborate a bit more on why your thoughts on why it may not be as useful in Kanban?
Yeah. And again, I want to stress, this is just Dan's opinion. This is not the opinion of Pro Kanban, right? This is just me talking. In knowledge work, anyway, the flow of knowledge work is characterized, and I would even say dominated by variability, and because of that, it makes the identification of and I'm going to use the word constraint because we're talking about theory of constraints. I'm not going to use the word bottleneck. The problem with bottleneck is that B word gets overloaded and people don't say the right thing, what they mean. But so I'm going to come at it from a theory of constraints perspective. It makes it very, 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 very difficult to find the constraint, because that's the thing with theory of constraint. There can be only one, right? It's like the Highlander. Because our workflow is dominated by variability, it makes it really, really hard to identify that constraint. And the TOC folks would be the very first people to tell you that if you identify that constraint incorrectly and you start applying the theory of constraint stuff and you've identified the constraint incorrectly, that's probably the worst thing that you can do. And so that's why, because it's so hard to identify where that single constraint is, in a Kanban workflow, I think there are much more effective, I would say, maybe much more amenable practices to start with. So, I mean, that's my thinking anyway, because we can talk into some of the math that people use to try to identify the constraint, which I think are very, very problematic from a Kanban perspective, I guess I should say from a knowledge work perspective. This is maybe one of those myths that Kanban is all about identifying and removing bottlenecks. We hear that a lot, and nothing could be further from the truth. It's not about identifying and removing bottlenecks. It is about making your flow better, but it's not necessarily about finding and removing bottlenecks.
Not removing, but helping your bottlenecks or constraint, Herbie, supporting it. So the value of flow relates to what needs the most help. So you swarm against that.
If you can identify where that constraint is, then by all means, theory of constraints is probably the way to go. If I'm just saying, but that's, to me, that's kind of a big if. But yeah, but it's one of the reasons why I talk to Steve Tendon all the time, is because there are, and I think as you go up the organization, because we talked about portfolio Kanban and strategy Kanban, as you go up the organization, it's probably easier to identify those constraints. And I think maybe, at that point, maybe theory of constraints is a little bit more, although, again, I still think there are better places to start, but it's all good.
Yeah, I think another way to think about it too is if we focus on reducing that variability. I like to think about it in terms of piles, and where do you have piles in your system that are creating variability in that flow. And so like I gave that example of sometimes we make the work items too small and it creates a pile up at one part of the flow because the work can't move independently through the system that we've designed. And so I think that's another way to think about it too, instead of it maybe being that single constraint or single bottleneck that you're trying to isolate. It's like, where do you start to have piles that are introducing variability into the flow of work?
So Dan, I'd probably kind of build on that with a difficult question, and feel free not to answer it if you don't want to. But there is a whole school of thought out there that builds on the fact that the point of Kanban is to identify a constraint, right? And you probably know the school of thought I'm referring to. I come across it a lot in my work all the time. Is there advice on how to not get into kind of political wrangling, but to simply just work with the organization to help them effectively deliver value?
This is why, and I know we sound like a broken record. We sound, I know, but it's gonna be the same answer. Maybe everybody can insert the same answer for every question. This is why we like work item age as a metric, so much, because if we can get away from the philosophical debate around, well, should it be theory of constraints, should it be Stewart's theory of Deming's theory of variation, should it be something else? I think to your point, if we can focus on something tangible, like why aren't these things flowing the way that we expect them to? Forget about maybe any underlying philosophy, but we know we got this item on our board that's 62 days or whatever Colleen said, and stuff should be flowing in 15 days. What are some pragmatic, tangible things that we can do to get that done? Now, maybe that's because of some problem with the bottleneck. Maybe it's because of something else. But at least let's start the conversation there with some like I said, some real hard, tangible proof of that hopefully will lead to a good outcome. So, and I may sound like I'm an expert in theory of constraints, but I'm not. I'm nowhere near an expert. I've read some books. By the way, I want to admit I've never actually made it all the way through the goal. I think it's a terrible book. I think it's just awful. And I'm going to admit it here, I've never made it all the way through that book. I have read most of Steve Tendon's stuff, and I do recommend, if people aren't familiar with Steve Tendon, I do on a regular basis recommend people read his stuff. But the theory of constraints, folks, even they don't talk about age too much. And from my perspective, if what you care about is flow, and I think you should care about flow, if what you care about is flow, it pretty much begins and ends with age. And everything else, all this other stuff, in my humble opinion, whether we're talking about theory of constraints, whether we're talking about just simple limiting of work in progress, whether we're talking about just really any improvement, to me, can be derived from just looking at age. So I don't know if that helps, but it's something, it's a real simple, tangible metric that you can hand management or anybody in an organization, say, hey, let's just look at this, and we'll go from there. Sorry, I rambled again.
Oh, that was useful. Thank you.
I've got a really simple question, and you can say it depends or whatever, but when you're doing the flow board, are you bring an item in, get an item out? So you're trying to, your throughput is like one item per day at least, minimum. And that kind of relates to maybe what Andrew or Artem can say with the Scrum when you're doing, are you trying to look for work, product item to be completed once per day, say within a 2-week sprint? How small are you making this stuff to go through the system?
Colleen, I've got answers. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I can tell you my approach here. I mean, it does depend a little in my mind. I think we tend to say like, how much WIP you're putting in that ready to pull column based on how frequently priorities change for that team. That being said, I tend to determine the WIP limit for the to-do column based on roughly a week's worth of throughput. I like to use the airport as an example for this because, if you've ever landed somewhere on the plane and you've had to sit on the runway for 2 hours because there's no gate to pull up to, your arrivals are outstripping your departures. And so if you think of your system that way, as soon as we start dropping more stuff in than is leaving, something's sitting, something's aging somewhere. And so I try to think about it more from like, what's the appropriate amount of planning that this team can do based on the amount of throughput that they have. For a team where it's maybe, ops or security or something where there's a high level of things changing all the time, I keep that WIP limit on their arrivals pretty low so that we're constantly giving ourselves an opportunity to reprioritize, right? We don't want to overplan and fill that column and have things age there before we get to do that work. And that's kind of that example I was using earlier. It's exactly what they were doing. They're filling up that to-do, they're over planning that to-do column, and everything that's more important is jumping to the top. So it's like, how do you thin that down to kind of match up with how much work is leaving the system on any given time or at any given point? Dan, what would you say?
Yeah, all of that. And one of the hardest things to do, if no one has ever limited WIP before, if you've never participated on a team where they've actively controlled work in progress, that's a really, 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 really hard thing to do. And it's one of the reasons why again, me personally, I'm not saying everybody, but me personally, I don't start out with, when you're introducing Kanban and Kanban principles, I don't start out with controlling WIP. That might sound like heresy to a lot of people, but I don't. As everybody knows, I start with aging. I don't start with WIP because it's so hard. So that's because I don't want to get into this situation where people feel like, well, if one thing leaves, then something has to come in, and one thing leaves and something has to come in. I don't necessarily care about that. I would approach it more from a little saw perspective, and I would say, longer term, do we care? What we care about is that on average, the stuff that is coming in is matching the stuff that's leaving. But on any given day, at any given minute, at any given second, when something leaves, does something immediately come in behind it? I don't know if I necessarily care about that. And I don't know if I necessarily care, that we are violating those work in progress limits from time to time. There might be very, very, very good reasons, good business justifications to do that. So we're bringing work in when nothing has finished. Again, I know this sounds like heresy, but we live in the real world, as we've seen, the real world is messy, and so my recommendation to team is don't necessarily get hung up on that number, that actual number too much, but just understand some of the reasons why you're doing and what the potential consequences are. Might be okay.
Yeah, well, Steve Tender would agree with your WIP limits. So he doesn't like them at all. Doesn't use them in chain flow.
He doesn't like, if I understand Steve right, he doesn't like column-based work in progress limits. There still needs to be some notion. Again, we need to have Steve on the show so he can represent his own opinion. I still think there's some notion of controlling WIP. It's just the column-based work in progress limits is, I think, where he has a problem. And he has some good points. I'm not sure that column-based work in progress limits are the best approach either. So.
They can straighten themselves.
Yep.
Okay. Those were some very valuable conversations. Okay, so we thank you a lot for being here with us. It was awesome. We thank you, Colleen and Daniel. Thanks a lot for your insights, for your knowledge. We thank all of the participants. We managed to raise a significant amount of money today, and we thank you for that. Yep. So I'm also going to say that the video from this meetup is going to be available in a couple of days on our YouTube channel, so you can subscribe. If you want to donate even more, you have all of the links, and you can subscribe to Agile with Ukraine. And tomorrow we're going to have also some awesome guests. We're going to have Barry Overeem and Christian Vervis from the Liberators, and they're going to be talking about how you could unleash your Scrum. So you are more than welcome to join as well.
Yeah, they're terrible, awful people. I don't recommend it at all. You could tell them I said that too, by the way.
Right, Daniel, thank you for promoting our initiative.
Yeah, and thank you because it was recorded.
They're so hard to get along with, those two. I mean, and they don't really know anything. So
advertisement company for this video. And if you want us to remove this part, we will send you a separate link for donation. Just individual one. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. And
You know, Daniel, I'm gonna send exactly this part to Steve Porter, Eric Neighbor, and Dave West as part of the work.
By all means. They'll just roll their eyes as I go, it's Dan talking again. So
Well,
Thanks a
thank
lot.
you, Andre and Artem, for all that you're doing. This is such an important effort, and we are really, truly honored to be a part of it. So thanks for having us.
yeah, thanks
you
for
for your
all the
support.
work and the effort that you're putting in. And thanks to everybody who joined and contributed. So happy to be a part of this initiative, and hope one day that we live in a world of peace where maybe we could do this in person in Ukraine. I'm looking forward to that day.
you are already invited.
Yeah.
I just want to
Exactly.
come play with your little ones, Artem. I've seen the little heads moving in the back, so I'll be there.
Yeah. Yeah. We have some heads. He was very. Please stop record.
I can't. You're talking all the time. Okay, so now we stop.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.